Daf Yomi, Tractate, Bava Metzia, page 21a, and we're starting a new chapter. A new parak. Parak means chapter in Hebrew. And it's the second chapter of Bava Metzia. It's called Elu Metzias, which means these are the findings, and it deals with found items, found objects, that one is required to make a public announcement. One is obligated to proclaim, so that the owner of the lost items can come and reclaim them. And here we start with the Mishnah on 21a. Elu Metzias Shelo ve'elu Chayav l'Hachros. The Mishnah says, in a case where one discovers lost items, which found items belong to him, and which items is he obligated to proclaim, to find, so that the owner of the lost items can come and reclaim them. These found items belong to him. If one found scattered produce, scattered coins, bundles of grain in a public area, round cakes or pressed figs, baker's loaves, strings of fish, cuts of meat, unprocessed wool fleeces that are taken from their state of origin directly after sharing, bound flax stalks, or bound strips of combed purple wool, these belong to him, as they have no distinguishing marks that would enable their owners to claim them. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, if one finds any lost item in which there is an alteration, he is obligated to proclaim his find. How so? If he found a round cake of pressed figs with an earthenware shard inside of it, or a loaf of bread with coins inside of it, he is obligated to proclaim his find, as perhaps the owner of the item inserted them as a distinguishing mark by means of which he could reclaim his property in case it became lost. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if one finds any Anpuria vessels, Klei Anpuria, it's very appropriate because Puria is like Purim, and we're very close to Purim. Amen? If one finds Anpuria vessels, since their shape is uniform and they are indistinguishable, he is not obligated to proclaim his find. Gemara, the Talmud, says, the Mishnah teaches an example of items that one finds without any distinguishing mark. If one found scattered produce, the Gemara asks, and how much produce, and how large an area constitutes scattered produce? Rabbi Yitzchak says, I was just thinking about Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, it is considered scattered produce when it has a dispersal ratio of 1 kav in an area of 4 by 4 cubits. Heichi dami. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If he found the produce scattered in a manner indicating that it came there by falling and was not deliberately placed there, then even if the volume of produce in that area was greater than this limit, it should also belong to him, because there is no distinguishing mark that would enable the owner to reclaim it. And if he found produce scattered in a manner indicating intentional placement, then even if the volume of produce in an area that size was less than this limit, he should also not be allowed to keep the produce, as clearly the owner plans on returning to reclaim his produce. I just had a thought right now, and it's a correlation that today is the 10th day of Adar. And typically, Elu Metzias is a chapter that one of the first, many yeshivas start with as the first Gemara. As I remembered, I think it was the first Gemara that I learned when I was 10 years old, and many people in 5th grade happened to be 10 years old. And so it's very interesting that we're on the 10th day of Adar now. It's the 10th day of this year. But that shows the importance of this year being 10 and 10 years old being the age of the median age of one who would learn Eila Metzias. But that would be specific to 5784, which is Taf Shin Pei Dalet, which is Daf. So maybe we should be on the lookout for many of these types of correlations. Amr Rav Ukva Bar Chama, Rav Ukva Bar Chama said, we are dealing with kernels of wheat that remain during the gathering of grain on the threshing floor. For kernels scattered with a dispersal ratio of 1 kav in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, whose gathering requires great exertion, a person does not exert himself and does not return and take them. Therefore he renounces his ownership of them, and one who finds the kernels may keep them. For kernels scattered in an area smaller than that, the owner exerts himself and returns and takes them, and therefore he does not renounce his ownership of them. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a dilemma. If a half a kav of kernels were scattered in an area of 2 by 4 cubits, what is the halacha? The aspects of the dilemma are: in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the reason that the owner renounces his ownership of the kernels? It is due to the fact that gathering the kernels requires great exertion. In the case of a half a kav of kernels scattered in an area of 2 by 4 cubits, since gathering them does not require great exertion, or as great of an exertion, he does not renounce his ownership of them. Or perhaps the owner renounces ownership in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits due to the fact that they are not of significant value. In the case of a half a kav of kernels scattered in an area of 2 by 4 cubits, since they are certainly not of significant value, he renounces his ownership of the kernels. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a related dilemma. If 2 kav of kernels were scattered in an area of 8 by 4 cubits, what is the halacha? The aspects of the dilemma are: if 1 kav of kernels is scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the reason that the owner renounces ownership? It is due to the fact that gathering them requires great exertion. This is true all the more so in the case of 2 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 8 by 4 cubits, and since gathering them requires even greater exertion, the owner renounces his ownership of them. Or perhaps the owner renounces his ownership in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits due to the fact that they are not of significant value. But in the case of 2 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 8 by 4 cubits, since they are of significant value, he does not renounce his ownership of them. If 1 kav of sesame seeds was scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the halacha? The aspects of the dilemma are: in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the reason that the owner renounces ownership? It is due to the fact that they are not of significant value. And in the case of sesame seeds, since they are of significant value, he does not renounce his ownership of them. Or perhaps the owner renounces ownership in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits due to the fact that gathering them requires great exertion. That is true all the more so in the case of sesame seeds. Since gathering them requires even greater exertion, he renounces his ownership of them. If 1 kav of dates was scattered with a dispersal ratio of 1 kav in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, or if 1 kav of pomegranates was scattered with a dispersal ratio of 1 kav in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the halacha? The aspect of the dilemma are: in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, what is the reason that the owner renounces ownership? It is due to the fact that they are not of significant value. And also in the case of 1 kav of dates in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, or 1 kav of pomegranates in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, since they are not of significant value, he renounces ownership of the fruit. Or perhaps the owner renounces ownership in the case of 1 kav of kernels scattered in an area of 4 by 4 cubits due to the fact that gathering them requires great exertion. And in the case of 1 kav of dates in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, or 1 kav of pomegranates in an area of 4 by 4 cubits, since the gathering of them does not require great exertion, he does not renounce his ownership of them. In all of these cases, what is the halacha? The Gemara concludes, Teiku. All these dilemmas shall stand unresolved until Elijah the prophet and the coming of Messiah. And this is, according to the Sofer of Rabbi Aharon Yehoshua Pesin, the 142nd Teiku in Talmud Bavali. Itmar, it was stated,